Can't read my, no he can read my Joker face. Joker face, Joker face. Without further Folie ado, the sequel to 2019's billion-dollar R-rated hit Joker is here, and it has belly flopped. No matter what your feelings on the movie might be, it is truly shocking that a sequel to a billion-dollar hit has done this badly at the box office. It's tracking behind The Flash and The Marvels, the latter being another sequel to a billion-dollar movie that failed to find an audience. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom also comes to mind for the same reasons. It is crazy when you look at the superhero peak from 2018 to 2019. Not only did you have the smash hit Avengers double bill, closing off a storyline that fans have been hyped up for across the entire decade, you had your Captain Marvels, your Aquamans, and your Jokers making cash hand over fist. It was a time where pretty much any superhero movie was guaranteed to be a slam dunk, but 5 years later, oh how things have changed. Deadpool & Wolverine was obviously a huge success earlier this year, but I think it's clear the hits are becoming few and far between. I did think at that point that perhaps the box office draw would revert back to the 2000s in the sense that only the A-list characters would be making proper money, but then we arrive at Joker Folie Deux, and it's proved that even that isn't true. The Joker is one of the most popular comic book characters of all time, and even he has failed to make any kind of impression on audiences. People spoke about superhero fatigue long before it truly became relevant to the mainstream movie-going audience. I think a lot of that was trying to will it into existence, honestly, but now I think we are truly hitting superhero fatigue. Post No Way Home, we had a bunch of poorly received movies outweighing the well-received ones. And then following that, we got poorly received superhero movies that stopped making money, the double whammies of genre death. Joker Folie Deux is as much a summary of the status quo of superhero movies as the first film was in its own era. Of course, the whole deal with both of these movies is that they're not superhero movies, they're better than that. When the first movie came out, you had Mark Maron telling fans that this was a movie for grown-ups, which was the funniest joke to come out of Joker 2019 because no movie for grown-ups has ever had to announce it. And anyhow, I think there's more complex themes and characters in movies like X-Men 2, Spider-Man 2, The Dark Knight, Logan, movies that embrace the mythos far more and have a broader audience appeal. I think the first Joker is really the epitome of thinking that dark and moody automatically makes something smart. You've got more damaged and more interesting characters in Guardians Volume 2.
It's metaphorical!
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as the king of comedy? I see why people like the first movie, I do. And I don't hate it, I think it's quite watchable, Joaquin Phoenix turns in an engaging performance and I'm never bored. It's incredibly relatable to have a character imagine a life with zazzy beats. It just borrows so liberally from Scorsese and his movies, namely Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, that you can't help but recognise it as incredibly derivative. It's not really a homage in the way Drive is to The Driver, or the way Knives Out is to Agatha Christie, or even the way The Penguin is to The Sopranos. At times, it feels like a direct lift of those movies in a way that feels very shallow and market driven. Of course we could make money at the box office if we remake Taxi Driver and slap a DC coat of paint on it, taking the popular iconography of the Joker to tell a story that has very little to do with the original character.
I gotta get in shape now. Too much sitting has ruined my body. Too much abuse has gone on for too long.
It was Taxi Driver for people who had never seen Taxi Driver, and I don't mean that as a snooty point of derision, I just mean that it's a 50-year-old movie that maybe some audiences haven't seen, in spite of it being a classic. You watch Joker without the context of that, or the lesser seen King of Comedy, and of course it feels like this refreshing, groundbreaking take on mental health and class consciousness.
And the comedy find of the year, making his television debut, Rupert Pupkin, the new King of Comedy.
I have a real affinity for the King of Comedy. It's my personal favourite Scorsese movie, and I think Rupert Pupkin is one of the most cringe-inducing, tragic characters in film history.
Rupert Pupkin. The more scribbled the name, the bigger the fame.
Every scene with him is pure gold. You want to laugh and cry in equal measure. He's pathetic, but his ambitions are somewhat endearing. His obsessions with fame make you feel sorry for him, but the further into the story you go, the darker the character gets. The masterstroke of it is that when Pupkin finally gets a shot on stage as a comedian, the movie doesn't go out of its way to show how terrible he would be. Instead, it's arguably even more tragic.
If she were only here today, I'd say, "Hey, Mom, what are you doing here? You've been dead for 9 years."
The network was right. He had some talent, but he needed to iron out the kinks, work on his material. There was something there if only he would do the hard work first. He's neither terrible nor is he amazing. He's just plain average.
But you called me average after 1 minute. But you called me after 1 minute of my first professional fight?
No, but you're still average.
And maybe that is enough in show business if you have nepotistic connections or the wealth to keep failing upwards, but Rupert Pupkin doesn't have any of that, and so he ends up going down a path that he thinks will lead to success the quickest, no matter the cost. You disavow his actions at the end of the story, but you can see how he became the way he is, and he is a sad and lonely character in the most captivating way.
Yeah.
From his relationship to his mother, to the woman he wants to marry, Rita, to his obsession with Jerry Lewis's Jerry Langford, there's a whole lot of Rupert Pupkin in Arthur Fleck. But of course, when Arthur Fleck gets on stage, he bombs with the most terrible jokes imaginable, taking the route that the king of comedy smartly avoids.
Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal. All right.
It's a masterpiece of a movie, one of Robert De Niro's best roles. He's an absolute chameleon in the role, and Joker distills everything I love about it, but does it worse. Mashing the king of comedy with the grimy vigilante justice of Taxi Driver makes for a film that is watchable, if only because it is borrowing from two of the greatest movies of all time.
Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
One original idea in the first movie is the thing that I like the most. Something that I actually think the Batman toyed with, but stopped short of making it work. In The Batman, a film I really like, Thomas Wayne is implied to be a terrible guy in league with the mob, ordering hits on innocent people. We're shocked, and it shatters Bruce's idealised version of his father.
Your father tried to pay the guy off, but he wasn't going for it, so he came to me.
But then Alfred reassures him and the audience that Thomas never had anybody killed.
He wasn't to protect the family image, and he didn't have anyone killed. Your father was a good man.
Don't worry, he was a complicated guy, but he was still essentially good. Joker, on the other hand, leaves ambiguity in the idea that Thomas Wayne could be an awful elitist slug, a tumour on Gotham and its working people.
I'm not your father. What's wrong with you?
Look at us.
I think you are.
It's heavily implied that he fathered Arthur, found out about the pregnancy, and had Penny Fleck committed so that the problem would go away. There's some evidence to suggest that it wasn't true, but I think overall the movie wants to lean on the idea that he was a piece of shit and he is truly Arthur's father. This Joker is the illegitimate brother of Bruce Wayne himself. On paper, making the Joker Batman's evil brother sounds so bad, but I think in execution it's the best thing about the movie. It totally works, and it gives us a new angle on Thomas Wayne that the movies would usually try to avoid. So whilst I think the allusions to Scorsese are derivative, that it wants so badly for you to see it as a movie for adults, that it doesn't really present you with a satisfying adaptation of the character, it has its merits, and it does try some things it doesn't get a lot of credit for.
It's not a joke.
And there's a ton of movies out there that are way more boring and don't look half as gorgeous. Overall, Joker is a just fine movie for me, but if you love it, I get it. I would implore you to go and see The King of Comedy if you haven't though. That is the funnier and more heartbreaking version of 2019's Joker.
Call the police. Get what you fucking deserve!
You might be thinking, why are you talking about the first movie so much in a review for Folie, Deux? Well, that's because it is staggering to me just how much better the first movie is compared to the second. The first movie might be a poor facsimile of Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, but at least it has structure and an arc, and you can see why Joker is the way he is. Basic tenets of movie making are fulfilled. There is a plot, things happen, characters change. There is next to nothing in the way of meaningful character interactions or story beats in this sequel. It is one of the worst sequels I've ever seen, one of the worst quote-unquote superhero movies I've ever seen, and certainly the worst musical I've ever seen. It's a complete nothing burger that somehow feels 2 hours and 18 minutes, and feels like the kind of movie that was rushed into production a year later, not a long gestating follow-up 5 years in the making. So this movie takes place in Arkham Asylum and the courtroom. Arthur is soon to be put on trial for his crimes in the first movie, and he falls in love with Lee Quinzel, a fellow inmate who is a fangirl of the Joker from the first movie. The problem is apparent just from summarising the spine of the movie. Everything is in service of what happened before. Where a good sequel might build upon events and give us plenty of new story to chew on, taking the characters to new, exciting and unexpected places, Joker Folie, Deux is just obsessed with talking about the previous movie. Alan Partridge interviews Arthur regarding his actions from part 1.
Well, some people call it gear and the others call it an outfit. But I call it clobber!
Lee just goes on and on about how awesome the Joker was. The entire second half is a poorly realised courtroom drama that just goes over the beats we've all seen. Characters from the first movie pop up in thankless cameo roles as they take the stand and contribute very little. In the first movie you can empathise with Arthur to a degree. The yuppies he murders are literally trying to kill him and he defends himself. Everything he knows about his mother and his upbringing is upended. He believes she didn't ever love him and he finds out that one of her ex-boyfriends abused him physically and mentally. He is brushed off by his potential biological father and he is humiliated on live television by the one person he idolised. He goes down a dark road that you can't justify, but you can see why he made a lot of his choices. In Joker 2, there's no reason to align with this guy because nothing happens. He's a passive protagonist through and through, and there's not much in the way of an arc. Beyond some awful stuff that happens to him later on in the film, there's very little reason to care for the majority of the runtime. What could be argued as an arc, wherein he rejects his Joker persona in favour of Arthur Fleck, just feels like a pointless revision of where the character ended up in the first movie. If I was a fan of part 1, I would have to headcanon this one out of existence and say that his story ended there. After all, it's better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime. One of the things that actively made me angry was how cowardly it is about being a musical. It commits to having the tunes in the most inoffensive and bitty way possible. Joker and Harley will sing often when they're the only ones in the room, just in case anyone was worried that the musical elements would break the reality of it all. Other times, we have to cut back to exactly where Arthur was standing before he started singing, just to make it clear that it was all in his head. And then when the movie wants to give us any of the spectacle expected of a musical, it has to transport us to somewhere clearly in the characters' heads, like the rooftop of Hotel Arkham or the Joker and Harley show. It's like it's embarrassed to be a musical. Part of the fun of breaking out into song is that the film world just goes with it. There's no need for clarification. If the film had just gotten over itself, we could have had some real show-stopping tunes with a bunch of backing dancers and some real fanfare. It would have made the Dianon plot much easier to sit through. I thought the musical numbers would carry the movie, but instead I groaned every time someone started to sing. It ended up feeling like padding, and I wish they were cut completely, if only to get the film down to a merciful 2 hours. I understand that a lot of people were put off by the fact it was a musical, but you might have convinced those people had you committed to it instead of being so grossly ashamed of it. I don't really understand the MO behind doing musical numbers in the first place, if this is the intended result. They should have just stuck to the original tone. What's also funny is that the needle drops in the first movie were far more memorable. At the end of the day, you can't call yourself a musical when every Austin Powers movie has better musical sequences. Shit getting so much arse.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Burt Bacharach.
What the world needs now.
The first movie has a surprisingly cool cast, including Brian Tyree Henry, Shea Wiggin, the aforementioned Zazie Beetz and Mark Maron, and of course Robert De Niro, the greatest actor of all time. Well, joint first.
Give me all you got!
Listen.
Give me all you got!
The sequel doesn't feature an awesome array of character actors, the only real standout addition being Brendan Gleeson, but he has a thankless and uninteresting role. The big De Niro-esque fanfare casting addition this time out is of course Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn. Now I only have a passing affinity for Gaga's music, she has some bangers, but I've always liked her as an artist in general. I think she's earnest, exceptionally smart and witty, and I've enjoyed her stint as an actor.
If you could do something dangerous just for once with no risk, what would you do?
Die.
She was great in both A Star is Born and House of Gucci, but I think this is her first real misstep in terms of performance, and it's not her fault so much as the material she's working with. This is the worst Harley Quinn adaptation of all time, barely the character, and even what is there in its own right is hollow. Lee Quinzel tells Arthur she's obsessed with the TV movie based on his life, and she courts the vulnerable patient who in turn falls in love with him. I know it's supposed to be a twisted romance, a bad romance if you will, but there is no chemistry between them, and I don't buy the obsession reciprocated in Arthur. The Zazie Beetz reveal in the first movie, where it turns out Arthur was imagining her presence, was really contrived and signposted, but I feel like it fit the character better at least. Giving the loner a girlfriend feels as tired as when they did it in You. It fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between the Joker and Harley. He manipulates her and plays on her insecurities, he is in control, and her long-term arc is about breaking free and realising that he doesn't really love her. I appreciate there's an attempt at subversion here, but Lee is so one note and really only exists in the story to represent the Joker's supporters on the outside and their hero worship of him. I don't get caught up in the twisted love story that's attempted. It should have been the backbone of the movie, not an afterthought alongside the courtroom drama. Maybe it's my own personal taste, but I also think she's way too hot in this movie for me to buy that she wants to shack up with this total incel. She still looks like Lady Gaga, whereas the visage of Arthur Fleck is something you can smell through the screen. Even with her obsession with his persona, I just don't buy it. I also think for a film that opens with an animated segment and toys with being a musical, it is a glaring omission that we never see that TV movie based on Arthur's life. That would have been a great opportunity to do something interesting with the way the first movie was perceived. The series finale of Barry comes to mind. You could also have had some fun with the casting of the TV movie's Arthur Fleck. Willem Dafoe as the actor, playing Arthur, playing the Joker. What about Justin Theroux's Ethan Chase, who made a cameo in the first movie? In any case, it would have been fun, it would have been a better way to revisit the first movie, beyond talking about it over and over again. One final point on the Harley Quinn in this movie, there's already a better version of this character in The King of Comedy. Yeah, it's time for more King of Comedy glazing.
Of course, they never told me that they loved me either, which was fine with me. But I love you.
Sandra Bernard's Marcia is a twisted, equally sad companion to Rupert Pupkin with a parasocial relationship to Jerry Langford that comes to a head in a deeply unsettling series of scenes. There's nothing remotely close to the characterisation of that person here, and it makes me wonder why Todd Phillips didn't just rip that character off after he already ripped off Rupert Pupkin for Arthur Fleck.
You're not allowed to have a good time. You can't get crazy. See, I have to be in control, and I like being in control. But you know, for one night, I'd like to see myself out of my head.
We also slowly get the worst Harvey Dent adaptation of all time. I don't get why they bothered making the opposition Harvey Dent when this character could have been any no-name lawyer. There's nothing about him that aligns to the character, and it's just pointless. The only reason he has that name is because the movie wants you to recognise him amongst the same narrative that is too ashamed to call its Harley Quinn, and instead has to go with Lee Quinzel. Over the course of the final act, Arthur insults his prison guards, and what follows is a scene that heavily implies they sexually assault him. I don't think depicting horrible things like this should be shied away from in cinema, and I find the crowd that want nothing bad depicted on screen, nor to have any deplorable characters, are infantile and frankly stupid. But that doesn't mean I think this movie handles that subject well, or justifies it within its narrative. Why does this happen in the movie other than to generate tasteless shock value? A movie like Todd Solondz Happiness has an assault in its story and you don't actually see any of it occur, but the story around it and the context for it is so utterly chilling and sickening, and the movie is very clear in how it wants you to feel about it. It doesn't go down that road purely for the sake of it, purely to shock you as an audience member. With the assault in Folie, Deux, it feels a bit like Todd Phillips is off-screen grinning, saying to the audience, wait till they get a load of this. So pleased that he was able to bring such a shocking moment to the big screen. It feels like the stereotypical student film dealing with heavy themes without the necessary grit or weight to depict them or say anything meaningful about them. And then there's the ending. Oh, fuck the ending.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
So Arthur is stabbed to death unceremoniously by another inmate. As he bleeds out, it's heavily implied that this killer will become another Joker, possibly the real Joker of this DC world. So not only does Arthur's story go out like a whimper, it feels like an ending written by Reddit. There have long been theories that the Arthur Fleck character is not the genius criminal that faces off with Batman in the Tale of Gotham, but rather the inspiration for that character. Many posited the theory that the first film told the story of a man who committed murders and inspired class riots in Gotham before Bruce Wayne would grow up to become Batman, and that his Joker would then be using the iconography of that original serial killer to stir up that old story and those associated feelings. That made sense to a lot of people, including myself. It would explain why the Joker was seemingly having his origin story whilst Bruce was a child, and why there was a Joker but no Batman to face him. It explains away why this Joker was nothing like the proper comic book Joker. I get the feeling that this was not the actual intent of the first movie, but a fan theory that caught on. Todd Phillips has literally said that this is the case with the ending of Folie, Deux, that this was a two-part origin of sorts leading up to the birth of the real Joker. In an interview with IGN, Phillips said, "The first film under the script always said an origin story, never said the origin story. It was this idea that maybe this isn't the Joker, maybe this is the inspiration for the Joker. So in essence, at the end of this movie, the thing you're being left with is, wait, what is that thing happening behind him? Is that the guy?" Phillips is clearly trying to assert that this was always the plan, that Joker's Joker was not the Joker, and I personally don't buy that. Whether or not he was inspired by the theories or he came up with it on his own, I think this new position has come about with the second movie. I don't think the first movie particularly cared about how it would insert itself into the later hypothetical timeline of Batman vs the Joker. It just wanted to use the mythos to tell a Taxi Driver-esque story. Because you're also saying definitively that Bruce's illegitimate brother was the inspiration for his arch nemesis, and that is pretty silly. It's the kind of theory that's much cooler as just that, a theory. This also doesn't work because they couldn't resist bringing in Harvey Dent and blowing up his face at the end of the movie. All the other established comic book characters, like the Waynes, fit into this theory chronologically, if we suppose the eventual Joker will terrorise Gotham and Batman will rise decades later. But this is like the CW show Gotham, where Harvey Dent is involved because he transforms into Two-Face several years too early, well before Bruce has the idea to become Batman. This further makes me think the idea that Arthur was always the Joker's inspiration just isn't true, and this ending came possibly very late in development. By the time the credits roll on Folie, Deux, what have we illuminated about the character of Arthur Fleck that we didn't already know? What transpired that actually accentuated the point of the first movie? What entertainment was even delivered? The first movie, for all its faults, worked as a one-and-done story. That was truly the most groundbreaking thing about it as a comic book movie. Todd Phillips, Joaquin Phoenix, and Arthur Fleck should have finished it there, and they would have walked away with a pretty iconic legacy. Now there will always be that little asterisk next to the cultural phenomenon that was 2019's Joker, this weird little nothing movie that nobody saw and nobody needed to see in the first place. The whole movie should have just adapted another Robert De Niro favourite and had Arthur Fleck meeting Lee Quinzel's parents, the Fockers. Now that would have been a motion picture, Warner Brothers. The first Joker to return in a theatrical release, and this was what we got. Nobody has come close to touching the King.
Hello, I'm the King. What? The King.
And I'm starting to suspect that nobody ever will. The next turn will be for Barry Keoghan and his respective Joker, presumably in 2026's The Batman Part 2, but really, everything that could have been said about the Joker has been said in The Dark Knight. Maybe it's time to give the character a break until we can come up with a Batman Joker story that can truly top it. And as for Todd Phillips, please go back to making us some comedy. I haven't laughed in the cinema in quite some time. Not intentionally, anyway. A big thank you to my full fat tier patrons, Dr. Chike, Nathan Shaw, Mike Nandu, and Neil Verma. I'm so chuffed you guys are supporting the channel like this, and your contributions are hugely helpful to keeping the channel shipshape. You absolutely rock, and I can't thank you enough. If you want to get early releases of my videos, or catch up on my latest reviews of Doctor Who, including Dot and Bubble and 73 Yards, then head on over to patreon.com/fullfatvideos.